Welcome to a Glastonbury Romance. Are you sure I can't interest you in another book, maybe? If not Glastonbury Romance? I've got Mouth Sounds by Frederick Newman. You could read that. Or The Tao of Meow. You could read that instead. No? What's that? You have to hear Glastonbury Romance? You can't go to sleep at night without hearing it? Well then, Glastonbury Romance it shall be. So, let's spend several minutes now in awkward silence while I try and find our place. Oh yes, we were just mentioning the boring theological tome Sam was about to read called the Importable Sin. Mr. Evans now turned upon him hurriedly. "Here's the one for your purposes," he said, emphasizing the your. "They didn't teach you at Corpus to read church Latin, I'm afraid," he went on. "But this is the Confessions in English, the best modern edition. It's worth £20. I don't know how Jones ever picked it up." He was beginning to close the glass doors again when Sam made a motion towards the book fallen against the gap. Mr. Evans jerked his arm away, but in such a manner as to make it appear that he did so by accident. He might have done it by accident, for here he was, fumbling as helplessly as ever with his precious key. Sam had grown really impatient by this time. St. Augustine's Confessions. Why, his father had got that book on a shelf that Sam had known from his childhood, side by side, not with the Unpardonable Sin, but with Bewick's Birds. Whatever it had been in that he had in his mind when he came here this morning, it certainly had not been St. Augustine. No, it had been just a vague craving to make one more attempt to find some possible attitude less skeptical than the one he had grown to adopt towards his father's creed. He felt indignant with Mr. Evans for rousing his hopes like that, and then presenting him with indecipherable parchment folios and with the Unpardonable Sin. But he hadn't lived cheek by jowl with a priest of God for nothing. He had wit enough to know why Mr. Evans's knees had knocked together. Either that book had some monstrous aphrodisiac of obscenities, or it was some pseudo-biblical fantasy that had turned, or was in process of turning, this poor, lonely devil's head. But what was the astonishing fellow doing now? Mr. Evans had put down his candle upon the floor. It was on his knees by a carved chest, on the top of which was something tied up in brown paper. The man was cursing under his breath as he tugged at a knot in the string of this large, flat parcel. Sam received the impression that he was under the guidance of a non-human puppet, for whom the least attempt to cope with the obstinacy of matter was an impossible task. Yeah, we've all been there, right? But Mr. Evans summoned him now to his side. He had completely recovered his equilibrium. Equilibrium. Yes, that's right. That's how I say equilibrium. He was once again the long-winded antiquary. Merlinus ambroniosus, Sam proceeded to spell out from the cover of the large volume now presented to his view. "Is this your own make-up?" he asked, using a word that his foster mother, Penny, might have used. "You mean my own composition?" said Mr. Evans, turning to his interlocutor the bland, bewildered, blinking face of a harmless Domini Samson. "Oh, no, my Vita Merlini, when it is finished, I have only just begun my collection of notes, will include elaborate details of the magician's life that this blundering idiot here does not seem even aware exist. Oh, no. This is a reprint of an 18th century compendium of excerpts from the Bodleian. It has certain documents that they won't let you take out of the Bodleian. For instance, it has the famous Pontypridd version of the disappearance of Merlin, proving conclusively that the turning castle called Cabernet was not at Bardsley, but here at Glastonbury, probably on what you people call Chalice Hill. But it is not an important book. I would never have purchased it if those Oxford fools, they were worse at Oxford than at Cambridge, hadn't got suspicious of me. I don't know why it is, Mr. Decker." He now scrambled to his feet, and Sam was relieved to see that he relinquished all attempt to tie up those strings again. "But I seem to excite suspicion when I go about. It's something to do with my appearance. I don't inspire confidence." He stretched himself up to his full height as he spoke. he had repossessed himself of the candle and also of the volume of St. Augustine worth £20. He now rose and fell in his loose slippers as if performing some species of gymnastic exercise. Haven't you any idea what it is? It is my nose, do you think? He lifted his hand, apparently quite forgetting that it held the candle, towards the features of his face, and as he did so, he smiled at Sam with such an ingenious Don Quixote kind of smile that Sam felt singularly disarmed. But Mr. Evans shook his head whimsically and hugged the big volume of St. Augustine and carried his candle. He led the way up the stairs back into the shop. Well, I must be off, I suppose, murmured Sam vaguely. I certainly can't afford £20. After a pause, he added rather sadly, I can't afford 20 shillings. I'll lend you the book, cried Mr. Evans. You'll never find another edition as pleasant to read. And if you haven't read it lately, you'll get a lot out of it. It's an interesting book, only rather morbid. But you are morbid yourself, just as I am. I should think it would rather suit you. Sam remained, for what seemed to him an interminable time, staring at the back of the Punchinello pepper box at the window. Mr. Evans was engaged in one of his perennial struggles with the inanimate. He was wrapping up the St. Augustine in cardboard boards, making as he did so such a facial contortions as would have been extravagant in a wrestling bout. When the Welshman at last handed him the parcel, Sam remarked nervously, Are you very busy this morning, Mr. Evans? Number 2's representative looked at him in surprise. Not especially, he said. I only asked you, wavered Sam, laying his fingers on the shop door handle, because my father wanted me to go to the station to see your friend Crow, who's sending round all these queer announcements. He sent you a lot, no doubt. Mr. Evans nodded. You want me to go with you? He asked. I thought it would be nice, returned Sam. All right, why not? Said Mr. Evans. I've got nothing to do but lock the door. People don't often drop in the morning. When the two men reached the little office down by the station, they found John preparing to sally forth on a private expedition of his own. It was difficult to catch his explanation of the purpose of this expedition, because the wooden shanty he occupied was invaded at that moment by a violent outpouring of steam from the engine of a luggage train that had stopped close behind it. Geaرد's office, having been the temporary office of a coal company and consequently situated in the goods yards of the Great Western Station, it had been to the accompaniment of the day-long shutting of trucks and puffing engines that John Crow had composed his extravagant advertisement of their midsummer pageant. As the three men stood together now at the door of the little office, Sam was unable to avoid a sidelong glance at the majestic proportions and almost personal dignity of the great green engine towering over them. The vast creature carried its name in clear gold letters upon its belly. It was called Sedgemoor. It may well be imagined how the appearance of this particular word, in so unexpected a place, gave to all those polished pistons and cogwheels a symbolic significance to the emerald heart of Sam. I forget who Sedgemoor is, but it appeared earlier in the book somehow. Just for the sake of the word Sedgemoor, there floated, like the disarrayed loveliness that so tantalized Spencer's stern Sir Guyon, the white limbs and the tender bosom of Nell, in and out of that iron entrails of her majestic monster. So something with Nell. I don't remember, though. I've got to go to Tor Field, John Crow was saying, before I can get on with my next set of circulars. I must see the lie of the land. Why don't you two come with me? At any rate, as far as the vicarage? I don't want to drag you any further, but it'll be easier to talk if we get away from here. Sam and Mr. Evans both signified their willingness to accompany him. I really came, said Sam with a disarming candor, as my father's plenipotentiary. He's read your first batch of circulars, and he's anxious to know more about the whole business. You mustn't think it's just impertinent interfering, but my father could really be an immense help if you're interested and like your ideas, as I'm sure he would. Well, I'll tell you how far we've got, says John, and then you'll have something definite to tell your father. I ought to have called on him about it long ago and asked his advice before it got as far as it has. Mr. Geard wanted me to, but these last days have slipped by with such speed that I don't seem to have had time for anything. What we propose, he went on, as they all three walked slowly up Benedict Street, is to have a mixed entertainment. Part of it will be just an ordinary fare, like what you have here, and Michaelmas. One more lively, I hope. Part of it, though, will be quite different from that. We propose to have, he peered certifiably and furtively into the faces of his companions, a Glastonbury passion play. John had a suspicion in his Isle of Islay mind that the words passion play would excite annoyance in both these men. He forgot the indelible egoism of human beings. Because his own head was just then so full of this scheme of Gaird's, it seemed to him that the mere mention of it would arrest lively tension and evoke either hostility or sympathy. He was not prepared for casual indifference. Yeah, I've been there with that. But casual indifference, tempered by politeness, was precisely what his grand news received. Sam's brain was full of Nell and of his struggle with his own passion. Mr. Evans' head was full of the sinister thoughts which his vision to the bookshelf had stirred up. Thus John's mentioning the historic passion of Jesus passed as lightly over both their heads as if it had been referring to a famine in China. Twice at their walk through the town, from Benedict Street to Chilwick Street, Mr. Evans was on the point of leaving them and going back to his shop. When they passed the vicarage gate in Silver Street, Sam was on the verge of bidding them goodbye. It was one of those occasions when a casual group of people seem held together by some invisible bond, contrary to the individual desire of every person composing the group. The dreamy passivity of both Mr. Evans and Sam was partly due to the fact that their own fate seemed to them to be hanging in the balance. Sam retained an obstinate clutch about the edition of St. Augustine which he had borrowed. This he could sweep into the master current of his feelings more easily than any vague purpose of John Crow's in Tor Field. Mr. Evans was able to get rid of every embodiment of his dark temptation, except one single passage in the Importable Sin, which some supernaturally crafty devil might have composed especially to devastate and overwhelm him. Certain images called up by their particular passage were so seductive that his knees grew weak as he thought of them. The worst of these images had to do with a killing blow delivered by an iron bar. The three men had reached the Albany barn at the corner of Beer Lane when things came to the worst with Mr. Evans. The wild and desperate thought seized him, as it had done only once before since he came to Glastonbury. Why not fling away every scruple? His mind seemed at that second absolutely balanced on a taut and twanging wire between two terrible eternities, an eternity of willful horror and an eternity of bleached, arid futility, devoid of all life sap. He could feel the path to the horror, shivering with deadly phosphorescent sweetness. He could feel the path to the renunciation, filing his nostrils with acrid dust, parching his naked feet, withering every human sensation till it was hollow as the shed shard of a dead beetle. The nature of his temptation was such that it had nothing to redeem it. Such an indomitable wickedness came straight out of the evil in the heart of the first cause, traveled through the interlocutor's space, and entered into the particular nerves of the erotic organism of Mr. Evans, which was predestined to respond to it. The unhappy man now surveyed with a sick eye those symbols of the evangelist, which endowed this ancient barn with such a majestic consecration. He felt a sudden loathing for the human spirit, so hampered by matter as to be driven to shifts like this, to the ransacking of the kingdoms of terrestrial life, for their clue to the beyond life. Drifting forward up Chilswick Street were the three men, and it was between the barn and the St. Michael's Inn that the bloody sweat of Mr. Evans' mental struggle poured down till he felt actually faint. If I yield, he said to himself, what then? Oh, with what blasting clearness he saw the terrible alternative. He saw himself obsessed again with the old bite, the old itch, the old sting, the old insatiable torture of desire. The thing has no end, he thought. The other way leads to places where you can rest. This goes on and on and on, without end. The struggle to renounce it is pain. Each day new pain. The pain of unspeakable dreariness. But if I don't struggle against it, it is worse than that. These men don't know whom they are walking with. They don't know, why should they be such a thing in the world as this? His mind recoiled from an attempt to envisage the nature of what it was that had first engendered the poison seed, which had detracted to itself so much kindred evil from the heart of the universe. And we'll leave Glastonbury now with that guy's sadistic, perverted thoughts. And until next time, I will see you in Glastonbury. Cheers, my friends. Cheers.